As Nigerians commemorate 31 years of the annulment of the June 12 presidential election, which in the political history of the country is considered as the freest, fairest, and most credible election that saw the emergence of MKO Abiola as the winner that was never declared. In this exclusive interview with one of the heroes of the June 12 agitation, Mr. Dele Alake, the current Minister of Solid Minerals, who was in the forefront of the struggle, you will get the authentic story from the point of MKO's intention to run to the election, annulment, agitations to reclaim his mandate, the arrest to the point of MKO's death. I am Ola Awakon. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview.
I recall very vividly, as if it was yesterday, the very night in December of 1992 that Chief MKO Abiola, my publisher then, called me to his house at night and said he wanted to run for office and that he wanted me to draft a public statement about his intention to run. So we argued back and forth, and based on my journalistic exposure and experience at the time and as an editor of his paper and all of that, the network, and the political barometer that I measured, it was obvious to me that the military was not ready to leave office. And so I gave him that point, and he said that he knew that, and that if, in any case, he did not run, in spite of the fact that the military was obviously not leaving office, that history would then blame him for not running. Because at that time, if you recall, he was the only political giant remaining in the political firmament of Nigeria, because prior to December 92, the then head of state, General Babangida, had added all the prominent political players across party lines into detention in Lekki after the contentious primaries of SDP and then the NRC as well. So all the people who were the front runners in that game at that time, the late General Yaradua, the late Alhaji Lateef Jakonde, and a host of others who were presidential candidates at the time, or presidential aspirants, So at the time that MKO intended to come out, he was the only political giant remaining in the firmament. And that was the reason he gave. He said if he did not venture into it to attempt to push out the military, history and posterity will not forgive him. We went round, we took MKO's plane to Kano, to Kaduna. He was intimating the traditional rulers and authorities in this. So eventually we went around the zones for him to personally intimate them. And then we started planning. And I had what I call selective exposure, being with him for 13 solid years, 10 of which I was his editor. So I went around the world with him. He took me around. I met several heads of states through him. Some we became personal friends till tomorrow. So we were in the primaries. We went for the primaries. He scaled through the primaries up until the convention of the SDP that will pick the presidential candidate of that party, of the SDP. We had that in Jos in March of 1993. So when we got to Jos, the temperature was high. The atmosphere was charged. The whole country actually was on edge. Everybody wanted the military to quit the scene. And MKO Abiola had spread joy all over Nigeria, in every nook and cranny of Nigeria, across religious divide, across ethnic affiliations, across social classification, across economic platforms. So he was well loved all over the country. So we were hell-bent on ensuring that he emerged as a candidate of the SDP. So ballots started, and then the first ballot ended in a tie. It was a tie between Chief Abiola and Babagana Kingibe. So by the time the elections came on June 12, it was everybody else in Nigeria who was conscious, who was aware, who was politically sagacious, knew that MKO was going to win that election. The only people that couldn't believe or did not envisage that he would win were the military top brass. And not all of them, the ultra-conservative wing of the military top brass, they didn't believe it. So when he won very convincingly, and I maintain it till tomorrow, that was the freest and the fairest, the most transparent elections that Nigeria has ever had. Because throughout that day, there was not a single incident of violence, of ballot snatching, of thuggery, of hooliganism anywhere, or of rigging anywhere. Secondly, it was on that day that everybody trooped out, including 80-year-olds, just to cast their vote, because it was payback time across the country for MKO. So the results were just, already foretold. And then, on June 16th, 4 days after the election, when most of the results had come in, everybody all over the world, including the observers, knew that MKO was, home and dry. And then I recall myself and Tunji Bello went to him, his house, in the afternoon, and he asked me to go and bring the bill for some of the adverts that we ran during the campaign. We had not finished paying the agency. So he asked me to go and bring the bill. And he said, and I quote his words, he said, "I do not want to take any debt to the presidency." So he said he wanted to settle all debts arising from the campaign expenditure. So I ran to my car downstairs in his compound and searched everywhere. I didn't get the bill. Apparently the bill was at home. I didn't bring it, that invoice of the agency. And so I went back upstairs. I said he wasn't there. He said, okay, I should bring it the following day. It was in the evening of that day that the results were suspended. And we plunged into the crisis. It was tremendous. It was a humongous crisis. I do not wish such a crisis for Nigeria again. There was confusion all over the country. There was consternation. Ashiwaju and the leaders, we now converged and we started planning, and there were moves all over the country to dissuade IBB, from going ahead with the suspension of the results and all of that. Lo and behold, on June 23rd, in the morning, we had a statement, or was it a broadcast or something it was a broadcast from the villa, totally annulling the elections. And Nigeria plunged into darkness from that moment. And of course, on our own part too, MKO summoned all the SDP leaders and the governors and everybody. We met in the Hope 93 Secretariat on Okpebi Road in Ikeja at the back of his house. And I recall that after deliberations, after a lot of arguments back and forth, a statement was drafted. I recall that Babagana Kingibe, Dr. Patrick Dele Alake, myself, and a few others went through. I think the first draft was done by Dr. Patrick Dele Alake, so we went through everything, and then eventually MKO okayed it. So I ran back to the office to publish and sent it round the entire Nigerian media. And the import of that statement was that MKO said he was not going to back down He was going to defend his mandate to the last drop of his blood, and called on all Nigerians, all lovers of freedom and democracy, to rise up against the military, against the annulment of that, because it was a bad precedent. So that was the beginning of the struggle against not just the annulment, but against militarism in Nigeria. And then after some time, I think in August, it was obvious that IBB could no longer stay. The heat was too much for him, even within the military. And may I make this point for the sake of posterity and history, especially now. So hurriedly, he put up a contraption called the interim national government, ING, and then brought in the late Chief Ernest Shonekan, who was chairman of UAC, because Shonekan, that was supposed to be a strategy, but it didn't work because IBB did not know the kind of culture of Yorubas, the Southwesterners. He now went to Abeokuta, the hometown of Chief MKO Abiola, to pick Ernest Shonekan as a head of state, a replacement, a substitute. But the Yoruba said, no, we didn't vote for Shonekan, we voted for MKO. And you don't end the leadership of the Yorubas simply because you have money, or because you have influence, or because you have the wherewithal to buy them. No. Yorubas are totally acculturated on the basis and contingents of honor. Being Democrats, and because the interim government was still in place, then he went to court. I recall that the judge, the late Justice Akinsoya, eventually ruled in favor of the motion and declared the ING illegal. So that's why we now started saying, the acronym was ING, Interim National Government. So we turned it to same acronym, ING, but illegal national government, And so after the judgment, there was some kind of, not just the heat, confusion in the country, in the political dynamics of the country. Here was a sitting head of state already declared illegal by a competent court. And of course, he was backed by the military. So in the confusion, Abacha now took over. But the point is, before Abacha took over, there was an understanding that he was coming to remove Shonekan and give effect to the court judgment and reinstate Chief MKO Abiola as the president. We felt there was insanity in Nigeria. So it should be back to sanity. And then the way forward. And in the speech, after the preambles and, the backdrop of what had happened or transpired in the country, we now set out a timetable for Abacha, such that between that November, within 6 months, he would have, restored all democratic structures and everything, and by April, he would then hand over to MKO Abiola. So, lo and behold, he came in on November 17th. And the speech, I recall that speech, when I finished the draft, Chief MKO went through it, made some adjustments as usual, and then said, we should give it to Abacha. I had no relationship with Abacha at all. So the speech was handed over to Mangold. He now announced the dissolution of all democratic structures Senate, the House of Reps, state assemblies, all democratic structures. That was when we knew that he had made a clear departure from what he ought to have done. So he then started calling for MKO to come and see him. And the night, I think it was the second night or so. So we sat in MKO's house and debated whether he should go or not. He first refused. He said he wasn't going, that he didn't want to go and confer legitimacy on Abacha. So some of us felt he should go, that if we had an original plan and this man now called for him to come, perhaps he wanted to discuss the way forward. So by the time we finished, we had to call Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu around 12 midnight that night, when MKO said he wasn't going, to also come and add his voice and wait to persuade MKO to go. Eventually, by the time MKO agreed, he said he wasn't going at night. It was about 2 a.m. or so. He said he wasn't going. That was why the following day at noon, when MKO went, it was Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu that accompanied him. And that is the video clip that they still show until tomorrow. And photograph. That's the genesis of that visit that I just told you. That was what happened. You know, and eventually, of course, they went and saw Abacha, and Abacha had used some subterfuge to record that clip that's been shown, as if it was a congratulatory visit and stuff like that, whereas it wasn't, you know. Thereafter, when MKO got back and said, you know, he didn't feel that that man was going to live up to his words and all that, then we intensified the struggle again. MKO decided to declare himself president, because at that point we needed something to energize the people. And so the whole thing was planned. Again, Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu was very pivotal in the plan. And that was what led to the famous Ekpetedo Declaration. Prior to that, MKO had been under heavy surveillance at home, everywhere. So a lot of us were being very, very careful, but we were still pursuing the struggle and the cause. And of course, led by the leaders, you know. So, eventually, we decided that that Ekpetedo Declaration must take place. Of course, we knew that there will be some kind of, you know, official reaction after that. Now, before then, MKO's house had been surrounded by heavily armed security agents with armored tanks all around, because they got intelligence that the declaration could happen. So they wanted to ensure that he couldn't get out of the house. Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu, as he then was, became so critical of the government. He became a major force of the NADECO struggle and a major financier as well. When Abacha came in and dissolved all democratic structures, Senator Bola Tinubu called, and a few, I think 4 of his colleagues, and then announced publicly, issued a statement reinstating all democratic structures against, that was a frontal attack against the military. Of course, the 4 of them were declared wanted immediately and eventually arrested. So Senator Tinubu was, and the 4 of them, they were detained at Alagbon Close. Dr. Bekor and Son Kuti was already detained by that time. So, from inside Alagbon Close, from inside detention, Senator Tinubu was financing and directing the operations of the struggle. Again, for the second time within a year, our paper was shut down. My office was shut down. I recall the first time they came to shut us down, I was going to publish a story, an exclusive story, which was damaging to the government. I don't know how they got the intelligence. On my production day was when they came to the office to raid the entire office. They came in, charged to my office. We also got some intel. So I went in and I was with the junior staff. They asked all the junior staff to come out. So I was among the junior staff. They asked them to leave. So I left with the junior staff. So I was told later they went to my office. Where's the editor? Where's the editor? And all of that. So they shut down the paper that day. Nigeria was to host the Junior World Cup or something, FIFA something in 95. We mounted tremendous, heavy propaganda, against the government, or that obnoxious government of Nigeria hosting that event. And I recall we used Senator Bola Tinubu's land telephone in his house in Cavendish then, calling members of the European Union, European Parliament, everybody, all embassies, all ambassadors. Eventually, we spent a heavy amount of money on phone, which Senator Tinubu offset. He paid for it. Eventually, FIFA withdrew the hosting rights of Nigeria that year, I recall. And so that was how we continued the struggle, both at home and abroad. So those were dangerously exciting times, and it was a selective exposure for some of us at a relatively young age, to be selectively exposed to such monumental and momentous events in the annals of Nigeria. It was quite an honor and a privilege and an experience. And suddenly on CNN, we saw a news break. Yeah, it was on CNN. Before then, in the afternoon, around 12 noon, Dr. Dele Alake had called me from Abuja to confirm that they had seen Chief MKO Abiola the night previous and that he was okay, that after coming out of detention, he would travel out to go, sort out his health and all of that and recuperate and rejuvenate and all that. But that he was okay. They saw him. So I was, working on air. Only for a few hours later, we saw the breaking news on CNN. There was spontaneous public reaction. People poured on the streets, and there was riots all over Lagos. Lagos became impassable. I didn't know. I wanted to get across to the head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, because this was at variance. That was an anticlimax from the promises that he made. But he got to me. He called me in the office. And when I took the receiver, he said to express his condolences and all that. And then afterwards, the transition program started. And he said he wasn't going to stay long on that seat. He stayed, I think, about 10 or 11 months. And then the elections were conducted, the parties were formed and all that. And I recall that Senator Bola Tinubu then from the US, because he had moved from London to US, called me to confirm MKO's death, and I did. I confirmed to him on phone, and he broke down on phone and started crying on phone. And I told him that he had to come back home, because he was a leader, a leading light of the street. There were consultations here and there. A lot of the leaders of Nadeco at that time felt, no, we should not be part of the transition at all. But Senator Tinubu differed and said, look, if we struggled and then we were at that point, and here the military, they had been compelled to put a transition program in place. So if we shied away from it, people who never took part in the struggle, who did not appreciate the norms and dynamics of democracy, will take over government. And that was eventually what happened. But Senator Tinubu decided to come back. And when he came back home, he came to my office in Concord. Again, there are living witnesses. Segun Babatope was there. Tuji Bello was there. In my office in Concord. And we had a meeting. He first said he was toying with the idea of going to the Senate. And we said, lie, no Senate. You have to go for the governorship. My own point and principle was that we were part of the June 12 movement. Even the manifesto of June 12, which we titled Farewell to Poverty, we crafted it. So, and I said, if Senator Tinubu came and became governor, that will give us a platform to implement the policies of farewell to poverty of that June 12. So it will be a kind of continuation of June 12, you know. And he agreed eventually with other stakeholders. Well, the rest is history. He became governor. And some of us found ourselves in his cabinet. But at the time, we believed that we only had civilian rule, not absolute democracy. So we continue to wage the struggle for proper democracy, true federalism, fiscal federalism. And we are still in the struggle till today. But the emergence of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu 30 years after is very symbolic. That his emergence will be the first time that a true progressive will assume the mantle of leadership of this country.
Thank you for watching the June 12 story of a frontline agitator and journalist during the struggle, Mr. Dele Alake. You can follow us on our social media handles for other June 12 exclusive interviews and stories. I remain Ola Awakon. Bye for now.